Okay, hi everyone. I'm Alexis Williams, co-founder of Business Skills for Health Professionals, and welcome to the Beyond Clinical podcast. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing health professionals from diverse backgrounds who've moved into unconventional roles beyond clinical. We'll be hearing their stories and tips and hope that this inspires you to pursue unique career paths. So today is episode number 12. I'd love to introduce my guest, Bridget Wojciak. Can you say hello to our audience, Bridget?
Hi, audience. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for having me, Alexis.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about your background. Bridget is an RDN and a seasoned strategy and business development leader with experience across retail, digital, healthcare, and merchandising. In her role today, Bridget is a digital site merchandiser on the e-commerce team at the largest traditional grocer of the United States, the Kroger Co. In 2018, Bridget was selected by the Produce for Better Health Foundation as Supermarket Dietitian of the Year. Congrats. In 2019, she was recognized by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics as Young Dietitian of the Year. Also, congrats. And in 2021, Progressive Grocer honored her with the GenNext Award, recognizing achievement and the potential for future successes amongst individuals under the age of 40. In 2022, Today's Dietitian magazine highlighted Bridget as one of the top 10 influential dietitians making a difference. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today. Hopefully, I just got a phone call that came in. I don't think it actually interrupted our recording, but I wanted to start out with a fun question though. I know you were saying this one's a tricky one to answer, but what's your favorite health and wellness trend at the moment?
I had to think about this one because there are so many different options to choose from. And when you're a dietitian, I think you're choosy about what trends you engage in and which ones you don't. In the past year, after doing some reflection, I've decided the number one thing that's helped my health and wellness is the Libby app. So it's the free
Oh.
app from the public library where you can listen to audiobooks. And because I've been able to listen to so many audiobooks, kind of coincidentally, it's helped me take a lot more steps because I find I enjoy the audiobook more if I'm moving. So
Mm,
audiobooks from the public library are
yeah.
my new health and wellness tip.
Ooh, I love that one. That's so unique. I'm actually a huge Libby fan, funny enough. I don't buy very many books. I get a lot of them from the Libby, and you can actually sync it if you have like an e-reader. Um, I actually have it synced to my e-reader, so I read some digital books too. But yeah, that's a great tip around the audiobooks. I find it a really good way to get through like maybe some of those like personal development books that are a little harder to find the time to sit down and read. Um, I love listening to those ones. That's awesome.
The trick is
Um,
you can change the speed. That took me
ooh,
months to figure out, and I love listening just a little bit faster. I also think if you're doing a task, like if you're doing dishes or laundry or walking, it helps you do your task a little bit faster.
yeah, for sure. Before we started the podcast, we were joking about the pile of laundry I have sitting over there, and that's when I like to listen to my podcasts. So yeah, audiobooks, podcasts, they're great for getting in those steps and getting through some tasks that maybe aren't the most fun. Awesome. Well, Bridget, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Sure, I'd love to. I graduated from Ohio State's medical dietetics program. It was a coordinated program. During the program, I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go in nutrition. I ended up landing in long term care. And if I'm being frank, it's because that's where there was job availability. I don't know if I ever envisioned myself in a career in long term care. And while I was there, I found it so purposeful because you're going to work every day in the home of the patients that are living there. Really, for some of them, then that is their home. And
Hmm.
I really enjoyed one, the close bonds that you make with those patients. And two, in that setting, oftentimes you are the only nutrition professional. So you're taught to step up and have an active voice for nutrition because you are actively teaching not just your patients about nutrition, but also your colleagues around you in the medical setting. I also
Hmm.
really loved that in long term care, I got kind of my first taste of process improvement because you're dealing with a lot of patients at a time. So you want to make sure those processes, like, are your patients getting weighed and are those weights getting analyzed quickly? There's always an opportunity to make sure that's done efficiently.
Hmm.
After long term care, I realized I wanted to be more on the preventative side of nutrition. So that's when I came over to Kroger. When I first started out, I was working indirect patient care, doing one-on-one medical nutrition therapy in the aisles. I
Mm.
loved it. I went on to supervise our dietitian program in the stores. So in addition to treating patients, I was also supervising other dietitians who were treating patients in the grocery store as well, which I always feel is really purposeful because when you see someone standing in front of an aisle at the grocery store, that is where the rubber meets the road. That's where you see the confusion on their face. And what I
Hmm.
learned from working with those patients in the stores really carried me for the rest of my career. So after I supervised the dietitian program, I then moved into a corporate role at the company where I worked on nutrition program development and new business development, kind of working on partnerships and then building out nutrition programming like our telenutrition program where you can work with a dietitian via video chat. After
Mm.
that, I moved on to the role of director of nutrition, where my primary responsibility was looking at our nutrition strategy for the next 3 to 5 years and how that would come to life through different amalgamations of nutrition programs and business development partnerships. After doing that for a period of time, I found myself working really closely with colleagues from all over the business, whether it be marketing or technology. And I spent a lot of time with the folks in e-commerce. At the same time, it was in the pandemic era, I had started using grocery delivery and really, really loved it. I found it made my life so much easier. So I
Mm.
developed this attachment to e-commerce because I loved the opportunity to bring groceries directly to someone's door. So cue my switch into digital merchandising, which has been an awesome opportunity to utilize the transferable skill sets I learned in all those other different roles.
Oh, it's so interesting. It's interesting how like your own personal use of online groceries led to that career switch. I love that. It's so interesting to see like where in such a big company you kind of were gravitating to. So super cool. What are some of those transferable skills that you found you kind of carried through your career?
I think the number one skill that has done the most for me is motivational interviewing and reflective listening. And that is
Mm.
one skill I see highlighted everywhere from clinical training for dietitians and other healthcare professionals. It's also heavily emphasized in executive coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it teaches you to be an active listener. So, especially as I had changed roles, a lot of times those roles were focused around nutrition, but the way nutrition was coming to life was changing really quickly. But the ability to listen and then restate that information to make sure you're understanding it correctly really carried me a long way. I also think when you work in healthcare, you are trained to work so closely with your interdisciplinary team. So I'll give a good example. When I was in long-term care, my best buds were physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, nursing, and we worked closely with our physician partners and pharmacy to make sure that when we were caring for patients, we had every piece of the puzzle accounted for. And in order to do
Mm-hmm.
that well, you really have to understand what it is that your partners do and also
Mm-hmm.
be teaching them what you do as well so you know when to call on each other. That same skill set of understanding a team became so important. One, when I switched to a retailer, because you're looking to understand what does your store manager do? What does your pharmacy
Mm-hmm.
manager do? What about your clinic manager, your head of departments? And so it's having this natural curiosity about understanding what everyone is bringing to the team. That skill set carried me again at the corporate level when you're working with partners from marketing, data analytics, technology, e-commerce. Staying curious about what everybody does and being willing to collaborate and pull in other teams really helps keep the customer at the forefront so that you know you're doing what's right for them and allowing everybody to practice at the top of their abilities. I think the other thing that was transferable was just good old basic leadership and empathy. When
Mm-hmm.
you care for patients, they are sharing some of the most vulnerable information that's happening in their life, especially around food and nutrition. And you want to approach that with kindness. And so, whether you're working with a patient, a customer, an end user, a colleague, that empathy goes a long way. In terms of innovation, I think that's been a really important transferable skill set because if you look at nutrition, we used to joke that nutrition information has a shelf life of 2 years, haha, because nutrition research evolves so quickly. When you're a
Mm-hmm.
dietitian, it's your full time job to keep up with that and make sure you're providing current education. The ability to understand and implement innovation was a huge help when it came to e-commerce because it's a new and emerging field that's changing very quickly. So if you can embrace innovation, I find regardless of the career path that you take, that will carry you a
Mm.
long way.
Mhm.
As far as hard skill sets, something that I found really helpful when I came to the corporate team of dietitians at Kroger, I worked a lot on building nutrition programs that just didn't exist before. And so
Mm.
oftentimes you will find in a business setting, it can be intimidating if someone says, gosh, we've never done this before. But if you have worked in program development, your bread and butter is taking things that didn't exist before and making them real. So something
Mm.
that can seem really scary in a situation, suddenly you become the person that everybody wants to call on if you have that skill set, kind of regardless of the setting. I also think that same thing applies with business development and kind of looking for external partnerships that will drive the business forward. There are things that
Mhm.
haven't existed previously, and you're kind of always looking for an opportunity to connect with other groups and organizations that are always going to keep the business goals and your shoppers at the forefront.
Wow. Yeah, lots to unpack there. I definitely agree with you on all of them, but I definitely could see the motivational interviewing one. I actually talk about that one a lot in some of the coaching that I do when it comes to how health professionals can be really good at leadership. Because when I started taking leadership courses in retail setting, I realized that coaching is a lot of the same principles: active listening, reflective listening, and that motivational interviewing skill. So I really agree with that one. And I also thought the one that you brought up that was quite unique around working with a team and the team collaboration, especially I can see that really transferring well to like when you're working on a new project in a business setting. And like you said, you're working with all these different partners, various team members from areas like IT and marketing, and like store implementation, that you really do need to understand what everyone brings to the table and how you can kind of do the best for the customer together. I love that one. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, can you share a little bit about how your networking, both internally and maybe externally, works within your industry, and maybe how that led to like the role that you're in now?
Internally into the nutrition industry, I found that staying in touch with the people that I went to school with was critical to having resources to answer tough questions early on,
Hmm.
especially if you're in direct patient care and you have other colleagues who are also in direct patient care. Let's say you're talking about diabetes management. The field of diabetes management, especially when it comes to nutrition, evolves super quickly. So if you can stay in touch with colleagues who are working in that same area, I think that's been helpful in terms of clinical knowledge. In terms of switching to a new field, I found that the trick is bravery. Just don't
Hmm.
be afraid to ask a stranger for help, whether it's an email or reaching out on LinkedIn and saying, hey, you work in a field that I think I might be interested in. Would you be willing to just schedule time with me to tell me about your career trajectory? And generally speaking, I've always found that people are really receptive to that. The flip side to that networking becomes the external piece of that, where oftentimes earlier in my career, I was the one asking for that meet. And now
Hmm.
I do my best when I'm further in my career to make sure that I'm granting that meet to other people and sharing information. I had the
Hmm.
opportunity to lecture at Ohio State around non-traditional careers for dietitians recently. And one of the questions that I got was, did you plan this career path? How did you know that you
Hmm.
wanted this career path? And I thought, ooh, well, I wish I could tell you that it was planned, but it definitely was not. It just kind of unfolded this way by always being willing to say yes.
Hmm.
So I think if you want knowledge, ask for it. If you have knowledge, embrace the share. And then
Hmm.
something that I always like to call out is when you see talent in the industry, whether it be internal or external, especially if you know someone's trying to make a career switch, take the opportunity to say someone's name in a room that they are not in. I think
Hmm.
that's the ultimate way you can help mentor other people in their careers, is to speak positively about them in opportunities where they may not have the ability to do it for themselves. I've had folks do that for me, and I will always be so thankful.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think I like how you addressed both your own journey, but also how you've supported others with kind of their networking. I think having someone, mention you and talk about you in different settings is so valuable. And I certainly can relate. We used to do these meetings when it came to like performance review time, where we would talk amongst different leaders. So my peers as leaders, and yeah, we would do just that. We would talk about individuals that were high performers that, maybe could look at transferring to a different department and having some more career growth for them. So I'm really happy to hear you say that that's part of what you do too. That's awesome. Um, what did you need to learn the most about when you were making that leap from maybe the science and health background to where you're working today?
I think when you come from a health background, something that I like to emphasize is that your North Star is going to stay the same, whether you're in health or business. So if you are in healthcare, oftentimes that North Star is your patient,
Mm-hmm.
always making decisions around what's best for the patient. In tech, you'll hear them describe their end user, making sure that the experience is optimal for the end user. In
Mm-hmm.
business, especially in retail, you'll hear us talk about the shopper or the shop path. And we always
Mm-hmm.
want to make every decision with the shopper at the front of our mind. So I think that part is awesome because it comes with you. What does not always come with you, sometimes what changes is the data that determines how you keep that individual at the forefront. So you're always going to be people first and people driven, but the metrics are very different. Like if you go in healthcare, they're probably more biometrics focused
Mm-hmm.
versus looking at something like tech, where you might be looking at your net promoter score or clicks
Mm-hmm.
into certain components versus business metrics, which might be more revenue driven. So
Mm-hmm.
I think when changing roles, step one is always to get a good idea of the landscape and understand what the measurement is that you're looking to achieve. And then once you figure that out, step two is to figure out what are the things that will impact those measurements, your clinical interventions, if you will. Think about your
Mm-hmm.
business interventions as similar to that. That's something that's kept me constantly evolving and learning to make sure that regardless of the role that I'm in, I have a good understanding of what success looks like.
Mm. Yeah, that's so important. I think you're bang on there. And I talk a lot sometimes about the overlap of when we learn as health professionals, like client-centered care, which is the same thing in a maybe in a more of a business setting as customer centricity. Like there's a lot of overlaps between those concepts. And I think I found that as I learned about some of the marketing terms, I found, okay, yeah, there's actually a lot of overlap between how I look at the way I served my patients in a clinical setting as to how we look at how we put like customers at the forefront of what we do in maybe like a business setting. So I love that you kind of echoed that as well. Um, in your current role, what do you enjoy the most about it?
I think I love how applicable it is. I have similar passions in terms of nutrition and e-commerce in the sense that my role today does not necessarily revolve around nutrition. There are parts and
Mm,
pieces where I get to use the information that I've learned previously to bring merchandising to life for the shopper. But nutrition is 100% applicable to your daily life. You eat multiple times a day. To the same coin, something that I really love about e-commerce and digital merchandising is think about the number of times a day, either on your phone, tablet, computer, that you are interacting with some type of e-commerce platform, whether it
mm,
be the way you shop for groceries or clothes, or even if you are going to maybe sign a child up for sports or you want to book an exercise class for yourself. You are so often presented with a platform, or I think my latest favorite example is streaming services. When you're going to sit down and
mm,
enjoy a little TV show at the end of the evening, how those streaming services organize that information, whether it's by shows that you've recently watched or new releases or personalization showing genres they think you'll enjoy. I now really enjoy looking at other e-commerce platforms and seeing how their strategy is coming to life to
mm-hmm,
keep me, the user, at the forefront. So I think I loved nutrition, still love it because it's applicable to my everyday life. And I find I love e-commerce because it now touches so many pieces of my life as well.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like when you're talking about food, e-commerce, retail, like it's all about making it easier to eat healthy in some ways too, right? So when I think about my own e-commerce experience when it comes to food, like it's so valuable when it remembers what I've recently bought and, suggests that I add that to my cart, or occasionally makes suggestions for swaps, things like that. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do, I think, in that space that's really cool and innovative, that will help people actually be like healthier too. So, but yeah, I can appreciate that you love to look at the different platforms and now kind of think, oh, that's neat. Like I could apply that to what I'm doing. Cool. So yeah, what are some areas you're working on for developing your career growth now?
My current favorite thing is strategic framework. So I often think it looks like if you work in clinical dietetics, you hear a lot around the term ADIME: assessment, diagnosis, intervention, monitoring, and evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that framework actually applies really well when you're writing a business strategy. So if you
Mm.
look at the assessment, you're going out and doing your industry landscape and benchmarking. Diagnosis is a lot like identifying what the market is missing. The meat of your strategy is in that intervention, saying what you plan to do differently. I am really enjoying right now seeing different ways that strategic framework can come to life in the e-commerce space. So I was fortunate to have the opportunity to do it with nutrition and nutrition programming in the retail space. And a lot of that framework of how you choose to build a strategy is very similar in the business
Mm.
space. And that's something that I find myself really enjoying. That's a bit more on the tangible skill set side. In terms of soft skills, something that I am always working on developing is celebrating. I
Mm.
spend a lot of time working really hard on all these projects, and you want to get things across the finish line and achieve your goals. Something that I want myself to focus on is to just pause a beat and say, wow, that went really great. I learned a lot. The result was great. I got to work with some awesome people, and just take more time to reflect on things that went well and use that kind of as a tool to stay resilient.
Mm.
Yeah, I think reflection and celebration are two things that I'm working on as well.
I think that's so important to even like one thing I started doing when I started working for myself was every month on the first day of the month, I reflect back on the things that were wins from the prior month. I think it's really valuable practice because sometimes we just focus on setting goals for the next month. But by kind of sitting back and thinking, okay, what went really well this month? It just gives you that positive energy and puts you in such a positive frame of mind and motivates you to keep going.
Do you do personal wins, professional wins, or both?
Both. I do both. Yeah. I think it's good to do both. Do you do that?
I do it at the end of the year. That's why I think,
Ah.
because we're still near-ish the beginning of the year, I notice at the end of the year, I'm really good about a retrospective wrap up, both personally and professionally. And it brings me so much joy because when I write it, I normally go back and look at previous years. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if you start to jump back 2, 3 years, you see market changes just in the overall structure of your life and what brings you joy.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do that more on kind of an incremental basis of getting that little chunk of joy, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I think it has a lot of positive benefits to our mental health too. One thing that I used to do when I worked in retail was I would keep a document or a folder. I think it was an email folder of all the positive customer feedback, that I was managing a team of dietitians similar to some of the work that you did. I would keep that folder, and every day where like any day where I was feeling kind of not the most positive, I would just go look at that folder, and it was so uplifting. And I also think from a career standpoint, keeping a folder like that of accomplishments and wins can be really valuable when you go to prepare for future interviews, because it keeps some of those positive experiences from your career top of mind, and you can just kind of refresh that before you go into an interview and have it kind of at the ready.
I think those are the moments that current you will thank past you for being so
Yeah.
organized. Because it can feel
Yeah.
so daunting to go into an interview and have that freeze moment of, I know I've done a lot of things, but I can't
Yeah.
remember what they are right now. That's great advice, to just do that reflection as you go.
Yeah, and I think it's all about making it simple, right? Like keeping a note on your phone or an email. Like that's why I found the email folder was so easy because I could just every time I got an email or something came in, I could just plunk it there and not have to like do anything with it. So yeah, it's got to be easy to do it on a regular basis. Um, yeah, if there's one thing you could share with your early career self, what would that be?
Um, I had to think a lot about this, and I think I landed on kind of the same thing I talked about before, which is focus on celebration and retrospect. But ultimately, one of the biggest things that I wish I could share with my earlier self was you will never regret trying something new.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned before I had a career trajectory that I did not sit and plan out. It came from consistently saying yes to new opportunities. And a lot of times it wasn't even an active yes. It was in order for your dietetics program to continue to grow, you'll have to learn to exercise project management skills. So I was so gung ho on wanting that program to grow and succeed. I was happy to learn whatever it was, new skill set wise, to facilitate the success of what I was working on. And if I look back to the one liner message behind that is you'll never regret trying something new because then you will know something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And just have those unique experiences that you never would have had if you hadn't been open to that. I think that's a really good one to share with yourself early on in your career. Yeah, what advice can you give to listeners who are maybe interested in finding a career beyond clinical?
I think it's be brave. Don't be afraid to ask someone else for help. I think there's a great opportunity to be coached in that space, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. But don't be afraid to reach out to someone else in the industry and say, hey, can you give me a little bit of time to walk me through your career path and what that might look like? I think there's a great opportunity, especially if you're right at the cusp of wanting to transition to something more business focused. When your skill set has been previously healthcare focused, it's get really good at explaining what you do in the healthcare setting in a way that easily demonstrates those transferable skills. Like we talked about leadership, empathy, motivational interviewing. Lots of clinicians are doing things in the process improvement space. You just might not use that term.
Hmm.
I think that's really important. I also think that you have to be willing to say yes to new opportunities, and you will open up those new opportunities for yourself if you are able to explain why you're a good fit. And that explaining in and of itself is really valuable. I think lots of times we focus on kind of getting the work done and building the bullets, but not talking about those bullets to being
Mm.
able to teach others why you would be a good fit for a new role. Healthcare providers are very, very good at teaching patients, but we're not always good at teaching our skill set forward. A way that
Hmm.
you know you're getting really good at teaching a skill set forward is there's a fun game we like to play in our friend group, and it's can you explain someone else's job? So
Hmm.
by the time you hit adulthood, lots of your friends have jobs that you've probably never heard of in your childhood. So not only can you explain your job, practice your explaining skill set by being able to explain the skill set that other people in your lives have and see if you can help them identify their transferable skills. Because lots of times, if you have an external person to focus on, it becomes much easier to brag on them because you love them. You think they're
Mm.
great. Once you feel what it looks like to explain those skills and summarize them and say great things about someone else in your life, it becomes a little bit easier to do it for yourself. So don't be afraid to tell your own story.
That's a cool one. And I feel like if you did that in a group like you mentioned, you could when someone does that for you, that could be really valuable to kind of motivate you because they're bragging about you. It gives you that like content to kind of talk about yourself in a positive way after the fact. So that's a good one. I love that. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us before we kind of wrap up today?
Can I flip it back to you? What do you recommend
Sure.
for people who are trying to switch from healthcare to business?
I definitely recommend connecting with people, like you said, like like reaching out to people in your network or not in your network, and just having conversations, learning about their stories and their paths. And that's why I love doing these interviews, because I think it gives people just a sense of, that the journey is not always linear, and there's a lot of curveballs and ups and downs that happen along the way. And I also think really diving deep on those transferable skills. We talk a lot about those on these podcasts, and really doing that reflection, like you said, of what you're currently doing and how can that be. I even talk a lot about how do you reword that into business language. For example, motivational interviewing is not a term that's highly understood in maybe a business context, but being a leader and a coach, coaching employees is something that can be adapted very easily. And I talked about that one earlier about being client-centered care can be adapted to like customer centricity. So kind of reflecting on some of your skills that you've learned in your roles and how you can reword them and kind of reframe them for that different setting. I think that's a really good one.
That's great advice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Okay. Yeah. So we'll wrap up. Do you have any other things you want to ask, or any other things to share before we do wrap up?
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed hearing from Bridget today and you're feeling inspired. If you want to engage more with our community, I do have a free Facebook group. It's called Business Skills for Health Professionals Community. I will link it in the show notes below. And we also have some exciting ways we can help you as a health professional. So we have 2 programs. We have our career transition program, which is all about making the transition into something beyond clinical. And then I also have a new program we just launched last week for those that are already working in a setting outside clinical. It's a new network and membership program. And I'll link both of these in the show notes below if you're interested in either of them. So thank you so much, Bridget, for joining us. And yeah, have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.